My name is Evelyn Grant, and I'm 60 years old. I've spent most of my life making sure the people I loved never went without, putting their needs ahead of my own, whether at work, at home, or in the quiet hours of early morning. I had always believed that sacrifices made out of love were never wasted until today. It was a Tuesday morning in Montclair, New Jersey, unseasonably warm for early April. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the sunlight catching the edges of my neatly stacked bills and a half-empty notebook. My iPad pinged with a notification, and I glanced down to see Michael's name flashing across the screen. 33 years old, my only son, and in that moment, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the spring air. I tapped the message open. The words hit me like ice water. Don't come to my wedding. Watch through Livestream. I blinked, rereading it, convinced I had misread something. My hands tightened around the mug. The wedding. Paris. The same wedding I'd been saving for years. The one I had already contributed $30,000 toward. I sat, frozen, staring at the screen, my mind racing. For a moment, the kitchen faded away, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the neighbor's dog barking down the street. Even the aroma of my coffee all vanished into the silence of disbelief. I had always been a mother who fought quietly, who solved problems with patience and reason, and yet here was a betrayal that left me raw, exposed, questioning the very foundation of the relationship I had built over decades. I set the coffee down and exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the message sink in. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't type, not yet. Instead, I let the quiet settle, letting the shock take its natural place beside the memories of every scraped knee I had bandaged, every college tuition I had paid, every late night I had spent worrying over their futures. The email had arrived, a cold dismissal wrapped in digital certainty. And in the stillness, I realized that today was the first day I would have to decide where my own life and my own worth truly began. I remember the night Michael was born as if it were yesterday. I was 30, exhausted, and filled with a mix of awe and fear, holding him for the first time. I promised silently to give him everything I could, to shield him from hardships I had endured, and to guide him through a world that often demanded more than it gave. When his sister arrived 3 years later, the promise doubled. And with it, the weight I carried. For decades, my life revolved around their needs. I juggled full-time work as a school administrator with evening tutoring sessions and weekend extra jobs just to keep the house running and ensure college funds were available. I skipped vacations, postponed personal goals, and even delayed my own retirement planning, all so they would never want for opportunity or security. There were nights I sat at the kitchen table long after the children were asleep, meticulously balancing bills, tuition statements, and future projections, wondering how I could stretch one paycheck to cover another unforeseen expense. I coached their little league games, stayed up late crafting costumes for school plays, and attended every parent-teacher conference, knowing that my presence mattered more than any gift or money. When Michael faced heartbreak in high school, I listened for hours, never judging, never offering easy solutions, just a steady presence he could rely on. College applications were a blur of forms, deadlines, and financial planning. I co-signed loans, saved every bonus, and scoured scholarships to ensure they had every chance to succeed. Even as the years passed and my hair silvered, the devotion didn't fade. I celebrated graduations with pride, attended every recital and milestone, and quietly bore the emotional labor of holding our family together through divorces, illnesses, and inevitable arguments. I watched them grow into adults, and though they sometimes pushed back or made mistakes, I thought my unwavering support had laid a foundation of gratitude and respect. And now, staring at Michael's email, all those years of effort, of sleepless nights and careful planning, felt dismissed with a few cold, typed words. It wasn't just the money for the wedding. It was the message that my presence, my guidance, and my sacrifices were not enough. The ache in my chest was sharp and unfamiliar. Not grief, exactly, but the hollow weight of being treated as if decades of love and labor meant nothing. I leaned back in my chair, letting the memories wash over me, and felt a quiet resolve begin to grow. If they could disregard everything I had given, then it was time to consider what I would give myself, and what I would no longer give to anyone who refused to see my worth. I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, the morning light slanting through the blinds, and stared at the email again. Michael's words echoed in my mind, crisp and uncompromising. Don't come to my wedding. Watch through Livestream. My first impulse was a rush of anger, a hot flare that would have demanded a response, demanded acknowledgement of the injustice. But I set my coffee down and let it pass. I had learned over 60 years that reactions can be weapons sometimes used against you without intention, sometimes misinterpreted. If I let my voice tremble, if I lashed out with tears or sharp words, Michael would seize it as proof I was fragile, unfit, or dramatic. That was exactly the reaction he expected. I refused to give it to him. Instead, I focused inward. I remembered the nights spent balancing their college funds, the sick days I took to care for them, the countless hours I'd given without recognition or thanks. All of it had shaped me, honed me, and now it reminded me that I could endure this too. My dignity, my sense of self, was mine to protect. I began mapping a quiet plan. I would respond briefly, without emotion, with words so neutral that they would convey neither guilt nor anger. I would ensure that any action I took, from canceling transfers to setting boundaries, was deliberate, controlled, and irrevocable. Every choice would be mine, reflecting the autonomy I had neglected for decades while focusing on their needs. Sitting there, the weight of years pressing against me, I felt an unfamiliar clarity. Anger could be wasted energy. Words could be twisted. Only calm and measured action could convey strength, preserve my dignity, and protect my well-being. The first step was simple: breathe, steady my hands, and wait. Let them call. Let them demand. I would respond on my terms. For the first time since reading that email, I felt a flicker of control. The storm could rage all it wanted, but I was already moving through it silently, deliberately, and unshakably. Chapter 4. Pressure builds. By late morning, I let it sit. Coffee in hand, I leaned back and considered decades of caregiving. Each call, each message, was an attempt to draw me into a reaction, a trap I refused to step into. The quiet in the kitchen offered a fragile shield. Outside, neighbors went about their day, Mrs. Chen walking her poodle. Kids waiting for the BU by midday. Texts arrived, increasingly insistent. Michael alternated between panic and guilt. Mom, the caterer, the flowers, the deposit. Everything's falling apart. Please respond. I read them once, then silenced my phone, placing it face down. I refused to. Social media updates followed. Friends of Michael and Natalie commented, speculating, questioning if I'd been new. I maintained my routine. I organized the mail, watered houseplants, and completed small tasks that anchored my day. Lunch was quiet soup and bread, a reminder that life moved at its own pace. not on my son's frantic schedule. By late afternoon, Michael's desperation escalated. Voicemails stacked up 12 in total. One played, his voice rough with urgency. "Mom, you have even as pressure built." Moments of calm persisted. A neighbor borrowed a garden tool. My office called to verify an appointment. Life continued in ordinary rhythms, and within me, a quiet certainty grew. No calls, texts, or social media commentary could force me to compromise my dignity. As evening fell, the storm outside my kitchen intensified. Yet I remained steadfast, composed, and deliberate, ready to face whatever came next on my own terms. I called Ridgeway Bank just after 4 in the afternoon. The hum of the air conditioning in my car blending with the distant sounds of Montclair traffic. The receptionist greeted me warmly, but I barely noticed. My voice was steady when I asked to speak with Carlos, the manager who had handled my accounts for over a decade. "Mrs. Grant? Always good to see you," he said, ushering me into his office with a professional smile. I sat down, smoothing my skirt over my knees, and met his eyes. "I need to cancel the wire transfer to Paris," I said, each word deliberate. "The one for my son's wedding?" Carlos's brow arched. "Yes," I confirmed. "There might be fees associated with this. I'll cover any fees," I said, my tone unwavering. I could feel the old tension in my chest, the urge to explain, to justify, but I stopped it. This wasn't about justification. This was about taking back control. Carlos typed into his computer, nodded once, and said, "It hasn't processed yet." You caught it just in time. Relief surged through me, followed by a quiet satisfaction. $50,000. That was the amount I had been prepared to send on top of the $30,000 already contributed. $80,000 in total. For a wedding I wasn't even allowed to attend. I thought of Michael's desperate calls, Natalie's social media posts, the mounting pressure from friends and family, and for the first time, none of it held power over me. Driving home, I passed familiar streets, the corner coffee shop, the little park where I had walked Michael as a toddler, the row of townhouses that had witnessed every scraped knee and birthday celebration. Each landmark reminded me of years of service and care, of late nights balancing budgets and early mornings preparing lunches. Those years had taught me patience, resilience, and how to fight quietly. Today, I applied all of it. At home, I poured myself a glass of Merlot I'd been saving for a special occasion. I took it out to the back deck and let the spring breeze brush against my face. The cherry trees were blooming, delicate and persistent, much like I felt at this moment. My fingers traced the rim of the glass as I thought of Michael and Natalie, of all the demands they had tried to place on me. I realized then that reclaiming control didn't require anger or confrontation. It required quiet decisiveness, the courage to set boundaries, and the willingness to place my own dignity above anyone else's expectations. The wire transfer was canceled. My autonomy was reaffirmed. And in that moment, I knew this was only the beginning of taking back everything that had been quietly, patiently, mine. By the next morning, the consequences of my decision had begun to ripple outward, far beyond my quiet kitchen. Michael's frantic calls started before sunrise. Each ring made my chest tighten, but I let them go to voicemail. When I listened later, his voice wavered between anger and desperation. "Mom, this is serious. They'll cancel the venue. We'll lose everything if you don't act." I set the phone down and exhaled slowly. His panic, urgent and raw, could not manipulate me anymore. Shortly after, the messages began. Natalie's texts arrived in rapid succession, clipped and sharp. "Mom, you're ruining everything. Please just wire the money. It's the wedding, not a negotiation. I read each one, then set the phone aside. The temptation to respond, to explain or apologize, surfaced for a moment, but I pushed it down. This was the test I had been preparing for silently, the one where patience and self-respect mattered more than appeasing frantic demands. Social media amplified the chaos. Friends and acquaintances commented on posts about Michael and Natalie's wedding, some expressing sympathy for them, others gently questioning why I wasn't attending. The strangers' opinions should have mattered, but they didn't. I scrolled past the hundreds of reactions. My mind focused instead on the steady rhythm of my own life, the bills on the counter, the potted plants I had yet to water, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. By late morning, Michael called again, and this time his voice carried more than panic. It carried judgment. "Mom, this isn't just money. People are saying you're selfish, that you don't care about us." I listened, silently, letting him vent. I didn't interrupt, didn't defend myself. I had long ago learned that words could inflame, that emotion could be weaponized. Instead, I held my composure like a shield, the calm in the storm. Around noon, Sophia, Natalie's childhood friend, showed up unexpectedly. She hesitated at the door before saying, "Mrs. Grant, I'm sorry to ambush you, but I wanted to explain what's happening." I gestured for her to sit, offering a cup of tea I'd just brewed. As she talked about the logistical chaos, the caterer, the venue, the upset family, my resolve only deepened. Every explanation, every plea was just another layer of pressure. But pressure alone could not break the foundation I had built over 60 years of deliberate choices. Evening came, and the flood of texts and voicemails hadn't stopped. Michael and Natalie were frantic, their voices raw with stress in every message. Yet for the first time, I didn't feel obligated to respond immediately. I allowed the tension to exist without letting it control me. I moved through my evening routines, preparing a simple dinner, watering the garden, checking the mail, letting the ordinary tasks anchor me in my autonomy. By nightfall, I realized the storm outside my home had reached its peak. The calls, messages, and online commentary were relentless. But inside me, a quiet certainty had taken hold. The fallout was real, and yet I remained composed, unwavering. I had made my choice, and I would not bend under pressure, no matter how loud the world became. The doorbell rang just as I was finishing the last of my dinner dishes. My hands were still damp from the warm water as I walked to the door, expecting perhaps a neighbor or a delivery. Instead, Michael stood there, his expression tight, his eyes reflecting a mix of frustration and uncertainty. Behind him, Natalie hesitated, a careful distance maintained, as if unsure how to step into the storm she had helped create. "Mom," Michael said, stepping forward before I could invite him in. There was urgency in his voice, but it was tempered by the fact that he could see I was calm. "We need to talk about this, about the wedding, the money." I held up my hand slightly. "We are talking," I said, my voice even, measured, but on my terms. "Sit down." They exchanged a glance, then took the living room chairs opposite me. Natalie fidgeted with the strap of her purse, her confidence fragile. Michael began to speak, words tumbling fast. He explained the cascading problems: the caterer, the venue, the parents in Paris, and the online chatter. He expected me to feel guilt, to relent, to offer a solution. I let him talk, listening carefully, letting every word reach my ears without dictating my response. When he paused, I leaned forward slightly. "Michael, Natalie," I began, carefully choosing each word. "I have always supported you. I have contributed what I could, financially and emotionally. but support is not permission to dismiss me or dictate my presence. I am not a bank, a convenience, or a tool to be manipulated. Natalie opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. Not now. Listen first. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. I let them feel the weight of the truth. I had raised my children with care, sacrifice, and patience, but decades of giving did not entitle them to disregard my dignity. Michael's jaw tightened, the words forming but unsaid. Natalie's eyes widened, realization dawning slowly. You're saying you won't, she began. I am saying exactly that. I replied, I will not be used or dismissed. You will respect my decisions, my space, and my worth, even if it challenges your plans. I watched as comprehension settled over them. The urgency faded slightly. The anger transformed into a mixture of frustration and respect. For the first time, they saw me not just as a mother to be managed, but as a person with agency, boundaries, and authority over my own life. The conversation shifted then. Less frantic, more deliberate. They asked questions, sought understanding, and I answered firmly but calmly, without caving or justifying excessively. Each answer reinforced the lesson my contributions had always been a gift, never a mandate, and my presence could not be coerced. When they finally rose to leave, the room was quiet but charged. Michael nodded once, curt, yet respectful. Natalie offered a hesitant smile, the kind that acknowledged defeat without humiliation. I walked them to the door. As it closed behind them, I felt a surge of clarity and strength. The confrontation had ended, but the lesson had been delivered. I remained standing, alone in the living room, not defeated, but resolute, and for the first time in a long time, completely in control of my own life. The morning after the confrontation, I woke earlier than usual, sunlight spilling across the living room floor. For the first time in weeks, there was no urgency pressing in from calls, texts, or social media. I made coffee and stepped out onto the back deck, inhaling the crisp spring air, the cherry trees in bloom swaying gently in the breeze. A quiet sense of freedom settled over me, heavier than any relief I had felt in years. I spent the day reconnecting with friends I had neglected, arranging a lunch with Claire, my former colleague, and calling Marjorie, who had always been a steadfast listener. Each conversation reminded me that life extended beyond the household I had managed for decades, beyond the obligations and expectations my children imposed. Their voices reinforced what I had begun to feel inside. Autonomy was not only possible, it was necessary. I turned my attention to personal projects I had postponed, reorganizing the study, revisiting painting, and planning a small trip to explore historic towns along the Hudson River. Each small decision, once weighted with guilt or delay, now felt deliberate, a tangible reclaiming of time and energy that had been spent prioritizing others. As evening fell, I lingered on the porch with a glass of wine, reflecting on the past weeks. The anger, frustration, and disappointment had transformed into clarity. I had established boundaries, asserted my worth, and discovered that my value did not depend on anyone's approval. The world felt larger, possibilities endless, and my place within it firmly mine. For the first time in a long time, I smiled without hesitation. I was Evelyn Grant, 60 years old, fully myself, free to chart the course of my life without compromise. The decisions I had made had cost nothing of my integrity, and I would carry that strength forward, unshakable, for every day to come.